It is not enough to be a good player. You also have to play well. He who fears the isolated queen pawn should give up chess. And rooks belong behind passed pawns. Sage advice, words of wisdom from one Sigbert Tarrasch. You've probably heard of Tarrasch, or at least the opening, Tarrasch. But today we are going to see one of his finest games. Did you know Tarrasch was a practicing doctor and declined to play the World Championship match against Steinitz in the late 1800s because he had to work? It was a very different time. Chess was not necessarily a profession for most. You may have seen this old photograph. And here we have Lasker, Alekhine, Capablanca, Marshall, and Tarrasch, the finalists of the 1914 St. Petersburg tournament. So Dr. Tarrasch, here we're going to see his finest game from the 1914 tournament in St. Petersburg, Russia. This tournament was epic proportions. It was won by the world champion himself, Lasker, defeating Capablanca in what has become a real legendary game. But Tarrasch's finest game came in this major event and won the Brilliancy Prize. Let's jump in and see Tarrasch c5. Not the typical way you see the Tarrasch defense played, but I think most viewers would recognize something like this. This definitely has the characteristics that you might expect from Tarrasch himself. Knight c6. Remember his quote about fearing the isolated queen pawn, you should just quit chess. So that is, of course, reflected in his opening. Castles, castles. His opponent, by the way, is Aaron Nimzo, of course, of My System fame, the most famous chess book, and also the Nimzo Indian Defense, a very influential chess thinker himself. Bishop to b2, b6. Actually, a very symmetrical pawn chain, only slight differences in the position. Nimzo chooses to go knight d2, bishop to b7, rook c1, and queen e7. Capture and capture. So here the game's starting to take shape. Nearly all pieces are developed, and probably the first move with a little bit of interest, knight h4. We're moving the knight for the second time. Perhaps a little bit artificial or obvious, let's say, that the threat is knight f5. Where else would the knight be going? g6, a pretty natural move, preventing the knight from coming to f5. And the knight just goes back to f3. Perhaps that was White's plan to begin with, inducing a weakness, but we still have the bishop that could cover those squares if needed, so we continue. Rook a d1, rook a d8, I should say. Captures, captures. That does open the bishop's diagonal, but the bishop alone is not going to create enough threats. Bishop to b5, and knight e4. A typical move in many Tarrasch defenses. It would be very dangerous to capture this knight, as it would open the rook staring straight at the queen. Bishop h2 in the cards, very likely. But Nimzo played bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6 in return. That does give black the two bishops, and queen c2. So this obviously is kind of sidestepping the rook, but here the game really starts to take shape. Knight takes knight. All of this is going to be based on the next move, d4. Regardless of which way they capture, I think d4 is coming. So let's look at the alternative that did not happen in the game, which was queen takes. I think d4 would just come anyway here, and despite potentially losing a pawn, the point would be to capture and really try to break up the safety of the white king. In the game, it went knight takes d2, and really from the words of Tartakower, he said the guardian of the kings field leaves his post for a moment. In other words, the only defender of the king leaves his post, assuming that queen c3 is a major threat wrongly. So basically, queen c3 was the point of everything white was trying to do, and it really doesn't cause that much danger or difficulty for black. d4 comes anyway. A little different, as we're not even trying to take the knight. What's the idea? After capturing, this move really sets off a chain of events, which you could say really decided this tournament. Bishop takes h2. Fantastic. Not your typical Greek gift, if you know that sacrifice. Queen h4, king g1, the only move. What's going on here? We usually have knight g4, but of course no knight in this case. A rook lift. Well, Tarrasch had something more sensational in mind. Bishop takes g2. Fantastic. Really threatening mate. f3 was played in response. Very scary situation. And rook e8. Again, just leaving the bishop, which cannot be taken here either, as this is just going to be checkmate, rook f2, and either piece capturing will lead to mate, but let's play like this, checkmate. So you cannot capture the bishop. We've developed another piece in the process, knight e4. All hands on deck here. Black is just trying to checkmate where white is just trying to survive. Check. Only legal move is king f2. Bishop takes, not really fearing rook takes, as queen h2 picks up the queen for free. So this attack has clearly succeeded. We picked up a free rook. Here, next comes d4. Really worth asking, why not knight f6? It's check. We threaten the rook, but there's just not enough danger here. Even when this looks so scary, for example, pawn takes pawn, threatening everything possible, scary as can be. Checkmate. It's just checkmate, with the rook guarding the other squares. So really, d5 comes first, trying to set this up, but f5, in fact, a very accurate move, giving your king some luft place to run and threatening the knight at the same time. If that knight moves, again, the rook then begins to guard all the squares, and queen g2 is just checkmate. Queen c3, threatening mate himself, Nimzo, but again, this is just too much. Black's turn, pieces swarming, and checkmate is just moves away. Rook takes e4. Another really nice move. Obviously, this game is just sensational with bishop takes, another bishop sacrifice, a rook sacrifice, and here it's just plain mate. Actually, Dr. Tarrasch misses the most accurate continuation. If you want to try to solve for mate in 3 from this position, go ahead. He played f4. Not bad, doesn't give away the advantage, but the mate was queen g3. Queen g3. The only legal move, king d2, queen f2, and queen e2. Really not that difficult. 3 queen checks in a row. I'm curious as to what he missed, but f4 was the real game, and just luring that king further out into the open, very difficult to survive. Using now the rook, queen, and bishop, king in the open field. Remember, we have to keep them in check, though, because if white gets a moment, queen g2 is checkmate on us, so Tarrasch does just that. Queen h2, the best move. Rook e8, and if you want to try to solve for mate in 1, a nice checkmate coming here. Bishop b5. That's checkmate. X marks the spot here, and the bishop guards through x-ray. The e8 square of the rook cannot be captured. So checkmate with your king on d7. Just move 32 in the game. Fantastic victory by Dr. Sigbert Tarrasch. I hope that was enjoyable for you all. A really nice game, and as I say many times in the past, really I encourage you to look at the games of the old players, the strong masters. There are so many good lessons, storylines, and really easier to understand. For us nowadays, it's fun to watch the top players in the world, but it's just computer versus computer type games. These games are much more full of action and easy to understand. So good luck out there, keep improving, and I want to hear from you all soon. Have a good night.